Hey there people, and let's get started with this new section here. So we will be talking about the classes and the structure. And some of you might be thinking that classes should have their own separate lectures and structure should have their own separate ones. But in Swift, the things are a little bit different. In Swift, the classes and the structure are so much comparable. And it's always a good idea to learn them side by side because you can now compare things with them. So here's my playground for classes and structures. And in the entire Swift, you will see that classes and structure are almost the same. Apart from the keyword class and struct, they are almost the same. Both of them have the properties to store the values. Both of them have methods to provide functionality. They do have subscripts and initializers as well. But classes have certain things onto an upper hand. And by that means they do have the ability to inherit the things. So inheritance is there, deinitializers are there, and a few more things are there. But in most of the cases, the structures and classes are interchangeable. So we do have the ability out there. So we'll talk about that later on. Right now, let's compare the classes and structure and how do we have it. So let's say I want to define a class here. So let's just say this is the keyword for the class and I'll call this as simply my class. There we go. And inside that I can define my properties, my functions, or in the class we call them as the method. But right now let's just say I have some codes here. Okay, so that is a typical structure of the class, but how do we define the structure? So we do use the keyword struct, and let's call this as mine or my struct would be a good. So let me delete this, my struct, and just after that, you just provide a pair of parentheses, curly braces in fact, and we can have some code here. There we go. So this is the most basic structure of the classes and structure, and we can see that they are almost the same apart from the keywords. Both can have properties, methods, initializers, and all the things. So it looks really good. Now let's define and try to have a simple example here. So I'll take a very simplest possible example here. So let's define first of all a structure here. There we go. And let's call this as res for the resolution. Now notice one thing here, that when I do actually use it in these cases, the classes should have the first name as a caps. Now this is not actually a rule, but it is a recommendation of the good programming. So let's just say we have a res for the resolution. Structure being defined, it will have a couple of properties and no method. So let's just define W for the width, and it's going to be, let's just say 0 for the starting, and we are going to have a height as well. So that's going to be 0 as well. Okay, so my structure is defined, and now I would like to access to a class as well. So let's define a class first of all. So let's call it as video. This video is going to have a couple of properties and a method as well. So first of all, let's define a method. So let's just call it as simply res, and this res is gonna be actually a simple res out there. So there we go, and this will be a method. So there we go, and thereafter this is the method that I have defined, but I would like to have a couple of properties as well. So let's have interlaced. So videos can be interlaced, so I'll call it as inter. And there we go, it would be a simple false, so it's a boolean value. And what should be the frame rate? So let's just call it as fr for the frame rate, and that's gonna be, let's just say 0.0. and we can have other things as well. So let's just say title is gonna be there, and let's just typecast that as simply string, and let's make it an optional. So the question mark here says that this value is optional. This might be there or might not be there. So there we go. It's really simple. Let me get rid of these extra lines out there. And now how do we define an object from the classes and structure, or simply calling if we want to create the instances from the classes and structure? It's again really simple. Let's just do that. So for example, I want to do this. It's going to be just let, and let's just say some, and it's going to be simply res, and you have to provide a pair of parentheses. That's how we do it. So now sum is actually an instance of the structure res, and just like that I can define vermor. So I'll say let's just say one sum. So very badly named, but yes, I can work out with that. And it's gonna be saying video. There we go, pair of parentheses. Okay, so we have defined the instances from these structures and the classes as well. Now the important point is, how do we access the properties or the methods that are inside our classes or the structure? So that's going to be interesting. So let's just say, how do we get that? So let me just call this sum, and as I put a dot here, now we can see we can access the h and w, because sum is actually an instance of the resolution which is having two properties, dot h and dot w, which is having a value of 0 in this case. Now for example, let's just use one more. So let's just say it says one sum, and I do want to access a method in that is going to be res. So let me just do a dot, and then I can use the res here. So there we go. But this res is not accessible here, but I can drill down into that and can access the h and w into it. So what I'm doing, my class is having this instance. This instance is calling this method, and this method actually calls this structure. So they are completely accessible. And the point here is, you can drill down into a variety of number of modes out there. Okay, so this was just a basic overview. Now let's talk about the member-wise initializations for the structure type. There is a very interesting note about the structure, that all the structures have automatically generated member-wise initializers. So you can use initializers in the member properties, and you can go with that. And one more interesting thing that you might want to know about, that you have been using actually structures quite a lot in the previous chapters. Yes, you had no idea, but you were using it. So all the basic type in the Swift, like integers, floating point numbers, boolean, strings, arrays, dictionary, whatever we have studied, are actually value typed or can be called as structures. So yes, all they are implemented in the structures. Now remember, the string that we are calling here as a capital S. So all that we have called, like integers, the double, boolean, strings, everything are implemented as a structures, not as a class. Surprise to many of the people out there, but yes, this is how these are being implemented. Okay, so this was the basic example that we have taken for the structure and classes, but for sure this is not over. We have to talk a lot of things about both of them. So let's discuss them in the next one.